Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I promise I will not take long, unlike the other guy who was here. Um, my name is Letabo, responsible for research at the MDDA. Yeah, I think this is the graveyard slot, so please do bear with us. I think in the spirit of it's a time to act, and I think everybody taking ownership. The purpose of this discussion is just about that, hearing different voices, perspectives, and ensuring that everybody is on board, ensuring that we have a safer online space for journalists and also those who are vulnerable or marginalized. I'm going to call our first panelist, Dr. Natisha Dukhi from the HSRC. She's a senior specialist researcher there. Also the rose amongst the thorns in this session. Second panelist is Dr. Mashilo Boloka. He is the CEO of a new, is it still new, dog? Startup, OS Lab, Online Safety Lab. He's the former CEO of the Film and Publications Board as well. And then lastly, in your program, it states that Advocate Makhwashane Matjeke was going to represent the FPB. She had a pressing matter to attend to, so he'll be replaced, or she'll be replaced rather, by Mr. Makhwashane Matjeke, who's Senior Manager for Research Analysis and Regulatory Affairs, Regulatory Development. Let me just, I tried to be modern this time and have my questions on my laptop and not write them down. So please bear with me. I'm also one of those people with very long passwords. I think maybe let me start off with you, Dr. Dukhi. GBV, as we all know, is quite a problem in our country. In the first panel, we heard that South Africa is quite a violent country, and it seems like the violence just manifests itself in different ways, and now on the social platforms, on the online platforms. Are we in maybe a position to quantify the socioeconomic and developmental impact of gender-based violence?
Thanks so much. I think always it's good to start with the positives, and one of the positives is being here. Setting the scene for something that 31 years later is still not too late. It's a time for us to act. But at the same time, let's unpack all of this. So last year, we had the first national gender-based violence survey. I was part of that team, or I'm still part of that team, but it's a pity that this part of gender-based violence was not featured there. And so the question I would ask, or what I would want, is that technology facilitated gender-based violence also has a space under that. Because these are all forms of violence, and we need to act accordingly. When we speak about socioeconomic disparities, what's important is coming back to that statement that was made in the first panel and prior. We are a violent country, there's no doubt about that. But where does this stem from? And often enough, I've asked this question, even with physical and sexual gender-based violence. Why are perpetrators perpetrating? Why? Where does this stem from? And it comes back to various things. One of the first being that 31 years ago, we finally saw the light of democracy. We finally saw people of color having a say and inclusivity bearing witness to that. But 31 years later, there are still massive problems with inclusivity. We speak about inclusivity at conferences, at symposiums, an event of priority like this, but are we really inclusive? And when we speak about violence, especially like today, where we're speaking about technology facilitated gender based violence, are we holding those accountable? Because the question, if I have to play devil's advocate, is yes, there are men out there perpetrating violence against women and children, and that's because of the system they've grown up in. And it comes back to the socioeconomic problems, the fact that the communities they were grown up, the households they were in. We saw last year the gender-based violence survey indicated that 74% of men indicated that by the age of 15 they had seen or experienced some kind of emotional trauma or physical trauma, and that was to violence. Seeing parents being violated, especially mothers, seeing fathers being very violent, and so that speaks volumes. But then playing devil's advocate is what then is of people who violate women through online media. You know, what propels them to do this? And we can see that it comes from a place of where I actually think it has to do with hate, for the fact it comes back to what the journalists were saying, what was so important this morning, is that we know for a fact there are a lot of women journalists who are doing really great work out there. And irrespective of whether this person, this journalist is queer, is a woman, is from any form or kind of vulnerable community, that does not give us the right to violate that person online or in person. And so it comes back to asking, are we not doing enough? What are we doing with our children, for example? Bringing it back to socio-economic norms. Social norms, cultural norms are things that go hand in hand when we talk about South Africa. Unfortunately, we rely too much on cultural norms and social norms and blame it on those for our actions. And we need to be held accountable for that. So, for example, if a politician is the one instigating or is responsible, or who has said, that woman is reporting on this thing about me, sort her out. How do we hold him or her accountable as a politician? Yes, there are forms of higher authority, but we need to hold them accountable. And what stems from them doing that? Is it hatred? Is it something to do directly with socioeconomic norms? Has it got to do with power and the fact that there is an abuse of power? Is it all of it? Is it a systemic problem that is continuously plagues South Africa because people in power, people who think they have power, will perpetrate any form of violence? And so in this scenario today, I would say that when we look and unpack this, there's so many dimensions to look at it, and I'm just going to touch briefly because I know of time. Firstly, looking at the human dimension is so important in this. People who perpetrate this need to be aware of how it's impacting those victims. They are not just spilling out these vile words online. They are not just making these threats with pictures of bullets. These are impacting people's mental health to the state, to the phase that women, or journalists rather, are saying, I'm done, I cannot do this any longer. It's not just impacting them in terms of, I'll leave my job as well. It's taking away their livelihoods, their dignity first, before everything else. So as we unpack socio-economic factors, I think it's so important that we press upon that what we fought for 31 years ago, and we are still fighting for. My call to action would be shame on South Africa, shame on us, that 31 years later, we are still talking in these narratives and spaces. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to change? So that next year or the year after, when we decide to redo the study and find out if there's been any changes, that we are not back sitting in this environment again and pledging to something that is ongoing. And that as that continues, women, queer, and disabled journalists continue to fight those struggles.
Thanks, Doc. I want to latch on to the issue of inclusivity that you raised earlier in my follow-up question. Just maybe to the FPB, around your mandate and legal framework. How effectively does the FPB Act enable the FPB to address emerging digital harms such as online harassment, disinformation, or technology-facilitated gender-based violence.
All right. Thank you.
You can switch on your mic. You good? Oh yeah, it's on.
Thank you. Yeah, the Film and Publication Board, its mandate, it's broad. It's broader than protection of journalists. Although journalists is one group in society, they will and they can benefit from the protection that comes with the Film and Publication Board. So the challenge with the enforcement is it comes with development in the technology space, media technology space. The growing volume of content, technology facilitated content, user generated content. So all these things, they complicate things for not only for the Film and Publication Board as a regulator that regulates films, games, and other publications, but other regulators like your .ZETNA, digital regulators like your .ZETNA, your ICASA, information regulator, and so forth. But what I wanted to say is that reporters or journalists, they can report the incidences of abuse when they experience them online to the Film and Publication Board, especially when they relate to violence, when they relate imminent violence, when they relate to hate and propaganda for war, because that's what we regulate. Like I said, the biggest problem is when it comes to social media, and a lot of user-generated contents, because users, they are becoming the biggest perpetrators. In the olden days, we used to worry about big technology companies or even media companies as the perpetrators of propaganda and disinformation and so forth. But now you have ordinary people who are big in the space, and they can produce a lot of content that is harmful to everyone, including journalists. But also, what I can say is that this reporting mechanism that we have, it's a bit of challenge, because we're not having a lot of people who are coming and reporting cases. One of our managers who's responsible for this portfolio, public complaints, he was saying that most of the victims, as we investigate, they withdraw. So you can see there are similar patterns that were mentioned in the findings of the study. So the issue of collaboration is very important. I think we're going to talk a lot about it and hammer on it a lot. So long as there will never be a time where we have like absolute protective regulatory and legal framework, there will always be gaps. But as we are constantly reviewing and improving on our regulatory framework, what should always be critical is how we collaborate together to close the gaps, to align in terms of implementation and enforcement. I think that's what is very critical. Thank you.
Yeah. Before I move on to Dr. Boloka, let me just lash on what you acknowledging that there are gaps. And one of the key issues in the research is that there are regulatory gaps. And I think there's a general understanding or consensus that the current framework that the FPB has focuses on consumer protection, focusing on hate speech, incitement, and non-consensual images. To close those gaps, what legislative amendments are required to explicitly cover online harassment targeting of journalists? Particularly also now, given that you have the policy, the white paper process taking place.
So there's quite a number of, I would say, even the Film and Publication Board itself, there's an opportunity to make certain amendments. You know, in any environment, if enforcement is not effective, you might want to improve in that area. Like, for instance, for me, I would mention, for instance, the issue of penalties. You might want to improve on making penalties more stringent, more painful. So that's another. And then also, as I mentioned, the issue of user-generated content. We need to find a way to address that issue, because the act as it is now concentrating more on commercial distributors, you know. But the world, the digital world has evolved, where now even ordinary users can generate content that is equally helpful as. So they must be made to account, you know, users. So those definitional amendments also maybe needs to be looked at. So those are some of the issues that I could raise.
Yeah. Doc, if I can pose the same question to you, Dr. Boloka. You, I think also of recent, wrote an opinion piece around the white paper. And my first question to you would be, what legislative amendments are required to plug the gaps? And my second question is, in our informal discussions, you spoke around how many of these attacks are coordinated. And there's almost like a cartel where groups of people are well-resourced and well-funded all over the world to perpetuate this kind of violence. So how do we even start pinning down these groups as well? And yeah, what from a maybe a justice or policing perspective, how do we also then ensure that all the relevant departments within the security cluster play their role in tracking these people down?
Let me first take this opportunity to thank you, MDDA, for inviting me. This is an organization that is so closer to my heart. I'm the first board member of this entity, and every time when I see this trademark, I remember the discussions that we had in 2004. There were various trademarks that we had to look at. But this one, I remember people saying, Mashilo, you like this because you drive Audi, but because if you look at it, it looks like an Audi trademark. So, and MDDA is always closer to my heart, and I'm happy that you are organizing this. Secondly, normally in South Africa, we seasonalize problems, including gender-based abuse. If you look at it, our conversation around gender-based abuse will be around August. And then once after August, we leave it to go to the next. And I'm happy that the MDDA managed to break that trend and still have this discussion during October, which is something very interesting. The organization that I'm leading is called Online Safety Lab. We specialize in online safety. Key amongst others is content moderation, awareness, and so forth. Key amongst the programs that we run is online gender-based harms or online gender-based violence program. And we do that as a non-commercial program, and that's why I think for us partnership is very important, because without partnership we won't be able to succeed. We do training, we do research, we do awareness like I've mentioned. And one of the initiatives that is currently underway, we hope we'll be able to launch it, is what you call a helpline for online victims, which we hope to launch it in January next year. And it's going to be a kind of closer collaboration with the international world, because I think there are currently only 3 or 4 of those that exist in the world. So we'll be amongst those that do that. This is simply because he mentioned the issue of reporting. Why are victims of online abuse, including journalists, not reporting it? Is because they see it as a secondary trauma, and knowing that sometimes this thing won't go anywhere, which means I think we need to do something about it. But for me, the biggest issue is, one, South Africa has got legislations that can enable us to take minimum steps. We just need to enforce that. If you look at the Film and Publications Amendment Act, number 11 of 2019, it gives you 2 categories. One is harmful, the other one is prohibited. Now, under harmful is any content, that's defined in the Act, is any content that has the capacity to cause harm, psychosocial harm. Therefore, online abuses such as whether it's doxing, whether it's deep fakes, they can be listed there. And then from there, the other one is prohibited, which is your hate and whatever. Out of that, the expectation, Jojo, is from MDDA, from FBB, is you expect the regulator to do, or like FPB to do regulations around that, to list that. You go to UK, they've got only one, UK and the whole of the European Union, they've got only one category called illegal content across the EU. And then from there, the regulators will list what constitutes that. So for us, for me, is enforcement and more enforcement. Because if you are not enforcing, you can talk legislative amendments until you turn a blind eye. Implement the Act, let those that are responsible be taken into account. One of the cases that we are dealing with, in short, relates to doxing. It's a journalist, and it's quite coincidental, because what do we receive as part of this online victim support? We receive a lot of cases. In other words, people who are victims, they report the matter to us. But this is a sad story. In a sense, she's a young journalist, and her biggest sin was to stand for other journalists who are being victimized online. And then the whole compound, including her ex, joined. And what we normally do in that kind of cases, the first step that we do is, because sometimes you don't have anyone to talk to, which is quite key. We link her up with a global WhatsApp group of online victims, then so that you are not alone. Then the second step is to check where this case is coming from. Although her case of over 24 months started in South Africa, it was taken over by a compound in, because this is a concerted attack coming from different groups. We, through our collaboration and partnership internationally, we referred the matter to the US authorities, FBI. They're handling it, and then after realizing that the victim is South African, then they've got connection here, which is now, this is where the matter is being handled. For us, those are some of the steps that we undertake. But the key thing, which is very important, is, you see, an attack on female journalists is actually an attack on the Constitution. Because, as it was indicated here, if you look at all the industry, including the one that you are in, is over 65% feminine. So, even this woman that I'm talking about, she got away from journalism practice. She withdrew completely. She shuts all the media accounts. She hasn't been working. And then in our last conversation, she said to me, I'm actually thinking, because I can't make ends meet. But the other cost that we don't often talk about for victims is the cost of therapy, because the psychologists need to be paid. Imagine you are no longer working because you have withdrawn, you have shut down all your company, because she was working largely online. Her platform is digital. Therefore, it means for all these months, because it started in 2023 December, and then it became worse. Since the beginning of the year, she hasn't been working. So what, but she still needs that psychosocial support. And then the question is, what is it that she needs to do? She has to make ends meet. She has to pay all the psychologists, otherwise they can't help her. Because her plea is simple. Can this thing stop? I'm not going to report this because it's going to take me years and then it's going to be a so. So for me is, let's start first with enforcement of the laws that we have. And then where there are challenges, then let's improve. Because we haven't actually implemented, whether it's the Film and Publications Act, whether it's the Cyber Crimes Act, we haven't really exhausted those. Like he said, they don't deal with a lot of cases. But how do we enforce the little that we have and move on? Finally, I'm happy with what Singapore is doing. Singapore is coming up with a new legislation called Online Safety, Relief and Accountability Act. It's going to be implemented, I think, before the end of the year. First of all, other than making sure that the victims get relief from, these online harms, it gives, or it forces the platform owners to deal with anonymous accounts, because a lot of these attacks, like in the case case that we deal with, are anonymous. Therefore, before you register, you must ensure that, or before you register an account as a platform, whether it's TikTok, whatever, you must make sure that you got the details of this person, so that if there are any transgressions or non-compliance, then the law may require that you divulge that. Because at the moment, people are hiding around that. Yeah. So these are some of the things that can happen. But for me, is South Africa, we've got enough legislations. We've got enough institutions. Let them do their job. Let us enforce the minimum laws that we have. And then whatever challenge, we can improve as we go along.
Thanks, Dr. Boloka. Dr. Dukhi, you spoke about inclusivity, and you asked the question, are we doing enough? I think given the report's evidence of GBV against women journalists, how can we, the people in the room, people on the online platform, integrate a gender-sensitive approach in the work that we do, whether it be policy making, a gender-sensitive approach towards fiscal budgeting.
I think anything that we are doing, whether it's budgeting, whether it's affecting policy, our strategies, our frameworks, we need to be inclusive of the people who have been affected. Without that voice, it's kind of saying like, when we get rid of the women journalists, the men will do the job. We can't let that narrative come through. We need to be saying, if these women are facing these harms, whatever form, whether it's cyber, whether it's physical, we need them in the room so that we can look at their side of things and what they need. What are their needs? Take, for example, what Doctor has just spoken about. A woman has been violated online over 24 months. What can we do? I mean, one is the narrative of her mental health decline, the fact that she does not want to work in that space anymore, she does not find any enjoyment or fulfillment. And we need to be asking, what are the immediate steps? There are immediate steps. Can we get her those support systems? What are the support systems for these journalists? Where can they seek them? We know reporting is a problem. What are we going to do in terms of reporting as a next step? And then long term, to ensure that there isn't any re-victimization in any form. Because we've seen when people report, what happens? Often enough, there is re-victimization occurring. How can we ensure from the immediate to the intermediate and to the long-term steps that we give a voice to the people affected, and that we allow them to make a contribution to these policies, to these actions? Because without them, if we haven't faced a form of violence, it's very easy to say we can support, we can do this or that. But if you have those voices in the room, like we saw in the panel earlier, we saw those were lived experiences.
Yeah.
Those weren't people just making up things or weren't people just sharing a narrative. These were lived experience. It was also experience of young journalists saying, I go to this interview and suddenly, instead of being asked, forgetting about what your qualifications are, forgetting what your skill set is, but you being asked if you enjoy sex, and demeaning you in that stance. So we need to be having a collective and working together. And when we speak about the collective, who do we have? There are media houses that we need to be inclusive of. The people affected. We need civil society to play a role, because from what we have seen today, it is very clear that a lot of people do not understand technology facilitated gender-based violence. And that is why we get these disgusting narratives that come about where people are saying, you should deal with it, just ignore it. How long are we going to ignore something, especially when it moves from something so-called innocent where they say, I'm going to come after you, I know your address. And even if you don't have kids or you have kids or whatever your household has, the fact remains that it starts to get more dangerous. And if we are not taking a stance at the very instance you are first attacked online, we shouldn't be waiting for this person to be cornered. There's a series on Netflix, I just came across it, just by very much chance. And it speaks to what the doctor was saying, something about this woman was building an app. So she was building an app. Her husband was quite a senior in the company. And it started off as just, sending her these messages, putting her face with the dog's body and things like that. And eventually it got worse where, they were sending signals, actually sending things to the household. And then it got a step further and more dangerous when they had noticed that she had a 14-year-old niece. And one of that compound decided that he would lure the 14-year-old niece with a nice, handsome picture of himself. And this 14-year-old is vulnerable. Because remember, teenagers facing so many different types of challenges in life. And one of them is acceptability in society. If you're a bit darker skinned, then you want to be looking as beautiful or being called as beautiful as other people. And suddenly, when the little older man gives you that attention, sometimes it's appealing. It's appealing for a child who is vulnerable. And that's what happened with this person. This child fell for it, and before she knew it, she was so entangled in it that she was taking pictures. It went from minimal clothes to nude pictures. And we know what happens with that. Before time, is these people online or these compounds will start to extort money. And that's the case that happened. They asked for the credit card of her grandmother, and the grandmother's credit card was abused over time. And by the end of that series, you saw that it just got worse over time because there wasn't any reporting mechanisms. The boss himself was somebody, or the leader, the team leader was somebody who said, but you shouldn't get involved in these things. Just concentrate on building your app. That's what you should focus on. It's like telling a journalist, no, go to Tembisa and you sort that out. Find out what's going on at the hospital there. But you're not worried about what's happening to that journalist. Maybe her family is being, threatened. Maybe they're sending her pictures and saying, oh, these are your kids. We'll come after them. And it's not just threats, it's really belittling. And so it speaks to the fact that we need to come together as a collective. We signed a pledge today, and we need to be held accountable, all of us that sign it. It's not just signing a document and walking away saying, we'll take some pictures and put it on social media. If that's what we've come to do, then shame on us. We've actually come where we sign this and we all do our part. As a scientist, my role is to go back to my team and say, I was here, what are we going to do to support this? Where we get rid of this form of violence or any form of violence against women or journalists. How can we ensure that the voice of journalists is inclusive so that 5 years from now when the HSRC does another survey, that we speak about other forms of violence, including technology-facilitated violence, and that we create more evidence base. Of course, we've already got this evidence base, 2 reports, one from last year which spoke to the other forms of violence, which was physical, sexual, economic, psychological, emotional. But now we're bringing in technology facilitated, and all these forms are important to talk about. But we need to move away from this whole anecdotal awareness. We keep talking about awareness, and we've gone past that stage. In 2025, we cannot remain in an awareness stage. We need to be actionable. We need to be saying what is operational now. What can we do as media houses, big techs, civil society, government initiative, academia, research institutions. We need to come together and ask these uncomfortable questions amongst ourselves and hold ourselves accountable of why haven't we done this before? Why did we wait for 2025 for this to happen? And in those conversations also include journalists and specifically people that were affected by that form of violence.
Thanks, Doc. I think let me take advantage of the commitment you've made now. And my follow-up was going to be, you had mentioned that you are part of the team that developed the national GBV strategy, and you acknowledged the absence of technology-facilitated GBV. Is there an opportunity to collaborate, to also work towards developing the online safety strategy?
Absolutely. I think there's never a time we should not be open to collaborate. I think if we want to work in silos, all we're going to get is where we started. We probably take 2 steps forward, and within a matter of months, we'll be 20 steps back. But if we collaborate, as I said, we put ourselves in that difficult spaces to ask difficult questions, not only to other stakeholders, but also to ourselves. Why didn't we do this? How can we be held accountable? It's like we said in the beginning in the first panel. Are we willing to see, I was having some conversations before the day started with some of the colleagues where we spoke about one of the videos, the most, well, I call it notorious, but lots of people call it famous video of this guy who bragged about killing the girlfriend, you know, on social media, and how people picked up the narrative, especially a lot of men who said, yeah, she deserved it. She should have obeyed you. She should have listened to you. Are we still listening to that and we are being okay with that? When we see a video pop up, now we know this on Instagram, Facebook, all of that, we might have a selected amount of people on our, who we call friends and people that we know, but because there's a lot of advertising and things going forward, you'll see when you open up your own social media page that a lot of it will have people you can follow, people you know you can befriend. My question is, what do we do when we see something like that occurring on those mediums? Are we going to just scroll past it and say, not my problem, it's this woman's problem if she's being harassed or she's being online violated? Or if we see a video of where a man is doing something, or even if we go into the street corner right now and we see a man beating a woman, are we all going to stand with a camera and say, let's put that on TikTok? You know? Or are we going to say, how do we stop that man? Stop that so that that woman is protected. And that comes back to the fact that if we are there scrolling past it, we are standing on a roadside curb and seeing someone being violated, then we are to blame. And we need to be held accountable. So, of course, collaboration is absolutely essential in all ways and forms. And this event today shows that just how much of commitment we can have. We saw the signing, we individually signed ours as well. And this is a call to action from all bodies. It even comes down to people not sitting in these spaces. People like school teachers. Children should be taught this even in primary schools. We shouldn't be waiting for a child to reach high school where they've made informed decisions already. Yeah. I've given talks, in the month of September, I gave talks at schools to children 10 to 12 years old. I work with those age groups of children currently. And it was astounding to see when I spoke about cyberbullying. The children, the majority of them went as far as saying, but Doc, we'll die. We'll die. Why is it that in 2025 our children are not saying maybe it will happen, differently? They've already gone past everything else and said, we're going to die. Is that what we're instilling in our children, to live a life of fear? To live a life where they always have to watch over their backs because anybody will violate them at any given time. So we need to be in all those spaces. Collaboration is not just people who are sitting in the room today. Collaboration needs to come from all. And I think the biggest challenge should be from government. Why aren't they here? Because we need to hold them accountable as well. A lot of the decisions we allow to, out of respect, we say it should come from there. But we have departments, we have the social development, we have the women and youth. All of those ministers should be held accountable to say, what are you doing? What is your role? Because when they put a hand on the Bible and they take their oath to come into power, that oath is meant to say that I am there as part of you, a civil person who was once a civil being, to say I am now there to hold your rights in high esteem. I am there to be your voice. Often enough, people are being violated and their voices are drummed down even more. And that comes back to reporting. Why would someone report in a country where they're not being heard? Why? Because it's going to go into ears, come out the other side. They either face re-victimization, they're either going to face even more violence and other forms of it, or have their family endure it, and that vicious cycle will continue. So again, we need to start collaborating, we need to start working together, and we need to start in our own spaces. We need to go back to our households today as a challenge and tell ourselves, we signed this here. What are we going to tell to our families? What are we going to tell to our children? Are we going to say, I've signed something and then forget about it because it's filed here with you guys in MDDA? No. It should be that call to action that today we've signed it on the 20th of October. 20th of October 2026, we should not be having the same conversation. We should have improved.
That's true. Thanks, Doc. And in fact, we had invited those ministries, Deputy Minister in Women and Children in the Presidency, Deputy Minister of Social Development, Deputy Minister of Justice as well. We had invited also some of the big techs, and I think, thank God that Google is here. I mean, TikTok is here. But I think that spirit of being accountable is largely absent, and I don't know how we would be able to foster it. Mr. Matjeke, the doc is talking about, and I think Dr. Boloka also touched on that, how people are afraid to report, and the re-victimization is part of the reason. So how can the FPB strengthen enforcement when victims are often withdrawn, or rather when victims often withdraw complaints due to fear, lack of recourse, or distrust in the legal system? And secondly, we now know that these harms are also of a cross-border nature. So what measures are in place to deal with online content hosted outside South Africa, considering that the cross-border nature of digital harms?
Okay. Yeah. So the issue of reporting, I think it goes down to the issue of implementation and enforcement of all the existing legislative frameworks. So like I said, some of the gaps is not necessarily because one institution is not doing its job or the FPB is not doing. The problem is how we collaborate and make sure that things are efficient. So you want that when someone reports the matter, you want them to feel that they are protected. But you find that is not our, as a FPB, is not our competence.
Yeah.
To make sure that someone is protected. What we can do is to make sure that the information is gathered in a manner that when it's submitted to law enforcement it can be speedily facilitated in terms of making sure that you bring the perpetrator to the book, you know. So there is that process where we work with law enforcement agencies, we train them, and so forth. But citizens being citizens out there, when they don't feel safe, you know, there's nothing you can do. You just get frustrated, you know. So all arms of the state need to be effective in terms of implementing the good policies that we have. And most of the policies that we have, they are good, they are effective, only if they get implemented. So it goes down the issue of collaboration that we all talking about, but also it's also the issue of being a good citizen that my colleague is talking about. That as citizens, sometimes we want to look to government and the policies to protect us. But you find that in our spaces, private spaces, we do those things. I worked a lot in economic development, industrial policy, and financial environment, you know. If once I mention these issues, you already know what the problem is, you know. Wherein there will be good industrial policy projects, small business development project, and so forth. But what happens is, when you have funding projects, what happens? The policy, the benefits of the policy, they don't reach to the people, you know. Just because some of us, we do not sort of respect the Constitution, we do not respect the dignity of the people. So that's another thing that we need. Hence, awareness is very important. Educational awareness and advocacy programs are very important everywhere. And also collaboration is very important. Not only collaboration in terms of activities, but because that should also lead in terms of budget. So you will find that there are organizations that got bigger budgets, but when you streamline and target the project, the problem together, then you are then able to have a bigger impact than when you are fragmented and sometimes you want to compete. So that is the problem. The issue of online content outside of South Africa, it's also a big challenge because it's also issue of cultural norms. Our cultures are not the same. Our morals and values are not the same. You know, we don't see things the same because also our constitutional frameworks are not the same. So with that, it's very important that digital regulators, they come together and sort of harmonize in terms of content, moderation, but also harmonize in terms of sort of media or digital literacy, education and advocacy, but also mobilize in terms of enforcement, you know, because someone can just sort of perpetrate harmful content knowing that in South Africa, knowing that they don't live in South Africa, so it's going to be hard for South African authorities to get to you. So also at that level, we should be able to work together internationally to make sure that there is collaboration.
Right, thanks. Dr. Boloka, the issue of content moderation keeps on coming up. the findings show that platforms like Facebook, X, TikTok fail to adequately address or adequately moderate misogynistic or harmful content. So what mechanisms can we put in place if there is a need? Or how can we improve on current mechanisms to hold big tech accountable? And my second question is, how can we ensure that platform algorithms and moderation policies are transparent, fair, and context sensitive to the Global South, given the issue of norms that Mr. Matjeke has raised?
Thank you very much. My colleague from GIZ, Zanila, asked me a question actually as to what is the preventative measures that we take, because normally we come after the incident has happened. That's why we've got all these cases. And that's why I always want to emphasize the issue of enforcement. You see, in other regions, which is something that we are trying to do in South Africa, which is what you do as online safety lab, is online risk assessment. Because if you go to Europe, Australia and so forth, in Asia, platforms are required by law to conduct online risk assessment on any product that they sell to the public, product or service. In other words, whether you are TikTok, you should be able on quarterly basis to do that assessment, submit the report to the regulator. So that before, in other words, you must show us what is the potential risk of people using your platform other than that which you are intending to do. We have tried that. We have been trying to push this with the platforms in South Africa, because whether you go to Australia, it's the same platforms, trust me, all of the same, unless the toxic ones that are small. The big ones, Telegram, Meta, and so forth. But because there's no regulatory push in South Africa, then they don't want to do that. We have been trying to say, hey, we even do some preliminary assessment on our part. Then we show them, you see, this is what your platform is being used for, whether it's X, whatever. But because there's no regulatory push, they don't see that as something that they must do. And for me, that's the first step, because the first form of defense against online harms, whether it's for female journalists, whether it's for general public, or even for children, start with the platforms, because they are the ones that are distributing this content. They are the ones through which deep fake is being created, and they don't do anything about it. And if they don't do anything, that's why in other countries the issue of penalties is very key. Now, where do you also see the problem on the African continent? Earlier this year, the African Union's Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights passed a resolution, 630. You must Google it. It emphasizing two things: adequate moderation and fact-checking. But it only provides that as a guideline. It doesn't tell you what happens if a platform doesn't make sure there's adequate moderation. And one of the things that you've been saying is that if you look at, I mean, do we have adequate moderators? They've got their own challenges, which I think is another abuse that I want us to talk about. Content moderators, a lot of them are Africans, based in Kenya. A lot of them are women. That's that level of abuse there, the level of abuse where you have to be, as a moderator, it's not an easy task. You see this beheading, you see this violence and whatever as a woman. Some of them pregnant, losing their babies. Some of them died. I mean, this year we buried one from Nigeria. So you see how much of harm is happening in this content environment. But what is it that the platforms are doing? Now you ask me, how do we make sure that there's adequate moderation? It boils down to the same thing. One, enforcement. You see, you can come up with others such as your education, your capacity training. But if these things are still happening there, what's going to happen? And then there's no recourse. That's why I love countries such as your Singapore, your UK, who on a weekly basis they find these big platforms, so that they need to know that their content must be moderated. If we are not doing anything about it, I'm telling you, next year, Doc, will be sitting here talking the same thing. If you listen, and I'm happy that the stories of those members of the panels that were here, they were speaking their own. And I'm saying, and this is a sad thing when they said to me, or when they said to us that, imagine you say, I'm facing this thing, and they say, no, just develop a thick skin. Who amongst us can develop a thick skin when your pictures are being manipulated into deep fakes and put on a porn, and you think, no, you can hold a brave face? You'll never. You'll never. That's why some of them, what do? They withdraw and leave journalism completely. And then they become unemployed. And that's why I say, if women leave journalism and take into account the fact that over 65% of the industry is feminine, it's threatening our own constitution around access to information, because you are going to have lesser and lesser journalist reporting and making sure they've got access to information. So for adequate moderation, we must hold these platforms to account. And the only institutions that can do that are the regulators. So if the regulators can hold them to account, I think you'll see an improvement. So that when you come with education, you were with me, and I'm happy we did that last week. We were on online safety awareness in schools, rural schools. And I think why do we do that? It's because children at high school, they are beginning to develop or generate deepfakes that they use against their female counterparts. So unless we start this chain, imagine when they grow up, they are already that so sophisticated, they are already getting into that culture. So we think we are dealing with this culture, but you're only cutting the leaves.
Yeah.
The roots are growing. So more enforcement, so that whatever standards or regulatory tools that we have as a country, including online risk assessment, that is put in place, then must be complied with. Because if you put legislation no one is complying with, there's no effect. I think he touched on that as well.
Yeah.
But also promoting, if you got a reporting mechanism, make sure that people know about it. And then as part of accountability, report, how many cases did we have? What kind of cases are this? How did we deal with this? And follow them up to their finalists. Because if we don't, people will never see that indeed there's something that has been done. And if there are cases of that end up in successful prosecution, raise awareness around that. I think it can be a deterrent. But the issue of making sure that there's prevention is quite key. But education still remains. But the first line of defense of the public, including journalists, against online harms is the platforms themselves.
Thank you. My last question, and I think there's been general consensus that an attack on journalists is an attack on the Constitution and our democracy. And those on the other side would argue that, but this is freedom of expression. So as my last question, and also as you give us your closing remarks, I'll start with you, Mr. Matjeke. How do we balance freedom of expression with the need to prevent digital harms in the online information ecosystem? I'll give you 1 minute, and then Dr. Boloka will end with you.
Yeah.
Dr. Dukhi.
No, thanks. I think that's the issue I think that we have been talking about
There you go.
of accountability. Accountability from platform owners is very critical, and then also accountability from users, citizens everywhere. It's very critical, because the common denominator is for all of us to respect our democratic rights. So there will always be tensions there and there, but so long as we do things in the spirit of protecting, the rights of everyone, the Constitution, then we are able to win in terms of a lot of things when we implement. But you'll find that even among ourselves as organizations and even social or civil society organizations. Sometimes we have our own biases. And I'm talking in general, you know, we get bored. We get bored. We are in other people's pockets, you know, even in the media, you know. So we do things that benefit someone instead of doing things that will benefit society. So if we can deal with that problem, a lot of regulatory framework, legal frameworks that we have are going to be effective because we are users, but we are also office bearers somewhere, you know, in government, in churches, and everywhere. So we need that moral fiber.
Thank you, Sivalalab. Dr. Boloka, your 1 minute.
For me, is an interesting. We had a webinar earlier on balancing freedom of expression and online public protection. What I like about our laws, including the Film and Publications Act, whether you talk takedowns, which is normally a case when someone finds that photos have been, you know, put on media or any content that is harmful to them, they don't just say take down. There's a process that is outlined, and that process also finds expression in the Electronic and Transaction Act, Section 77, because there's that process that is outlined to balance that, to make sure that your rights are not circumvented. So I think for me is the mechanisms that you put in place to ensure that your freedom of expression doesn't end up in online abuse of others or harming of others. So I'm happy with the guardrails that our laws provide in terms of balancing that you can't say is abusing or is infringing on my freedom of expression. Meanwhile, you are also abusing others, which means you are violating their rights as well. That balance, I think, in our laws is very solid. And we just have to promote that, and the regulators like FP must promote that a lot.
Thank you. Doc?
I think, it comes to what you've said, you know, that paradox, and that we need to look at it. We can't also over-regulate, because then we take away the freedom of speech, especially when it's legitimate and it's correct. So we need to be careful of that. But I think in closing, one of the most important things is when we look at technology, and we've seen this transition from the 80s to the 90s and now in the 21st century, along with the greatness of technology has also come a lot of complexities and issues. So we are aware of that. But at the same time, we need to make people aware, and maybe we need to flip the narrative sometimes. We've seen that when we continuously put out that this study revealed this, and it's not drumming down on the people who are perpetrating. Maybe we need to change the narrative to them, to bring it back to them. People who are doing this have, there must be something wrong. Why are you doing this? Why do you continue to harass somebody? Why do you harass journalists? What is the reasoning behind it? Because it seems like the more we put the narrative, we actually run the risk of re-victimizing people, unfortunately, at times. And so we flip the narrative and call out and say, let's talk about technology facilitated GBV. But instead of only talking about our results of our study, we now focus on who are these perpetrators. Let's talk about the compounds. Let's talk about how they are infiltrating people's lives. It will force them to understand and also to acknowledge that we are not stupid. We are onto them now. We know and we are aware of what they're doing. And maybe we need that narrative to be pushed alongside. I'm not saying leave the other, which is also very, very important, because victims need their voices to be heard, obviously. But push this narrative of the perpetrators, that people could be sitting in other countries, people could be sitting elsewhere and still perpetrating against women and journalists. in South Africa. And against what the doctor said, that there are mechanisms coming into play, that countries are collaborating and talking to each other. So it forces them to understand that, okay, they're on to me.
Yeah.
Because for too long we've let it slide, and they see it as a narrative, oh, you guys are always the victims, we'll continue. Flip the narrative, and we need to start. And it speaks to what was said in the very beginning when we spoke about the results of the study. The time is to act now, but not only act in the sense of making this awareness and the study. Now we've got to challenge ourselves. Who do we work with? What are we going to work towards? And how are we going to bring these people down so that this narrative changes completely? How do we protect our children from it so that they don't also become violators into the future? And those who are guilty of it, how do we hold them accountable? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. I think that one of the important things that was raised is we need to start from the roots. And I think in the absence of the MDDA executives, I think I must commit to both OSLab and the FPB that we are more than willing to collaborate and to work with you in visiting these schools to ensure that we preach the word to these young kids, so that, and even adults, because adults also fall victim. We preach to those who haven't converted to ensure that we have safer online spaces. When you say that we are onto them, you remind me of Mam Kawula in Parliament when she was in the NCOP. She was saying, "Uyez mkhonazi." Yeah, and hopefully we can find ways of doing work on ensuring that we expose these compounds. Thank you very much for your time and joining us. We're going to open the floor maybe to a few questions. No? Okay. The police have said no to the questions. Yeah, that's our time. Thank you very much.